Now we're covering Season 7, Episode 7 of the Clone Wars. Dangerous Debt. I... The quote at the beginning is, "Who you were does not have to define who you are." And I quote, actually, something that immediately follows through on the failed attempt at a character arc here. We have street rats and a Jedi. Both of them have been cast out of their particular lives, either because they want to or because they choose to. I guess, depending on how you look at that. And then both of them have to adapt to the new lives that they're being led into. And that's a good premise. I'm with the premise there, really. So, I have to point this out. I usually don't comment on the narration, previously on. But I have to comment on the narration here, because he specifically makes a point that tempers flared when it was revealed that the spice was being delivered to the Pikes. And I just feel like pointing out that even this episode makes it clear, in case there was any mistaking this, that no, it's not the slavery, it's not the spice, it's the fact that they're delivering it to the Pikes. That's the problem. So then there's another terrible argument. Rafa's overall argument boils down to the fact that if they had just done this one job, they would have been scot-free. Even though the previous episode made a rather significant point that this was the beginning of a long-term partnership. And she also says, screw the overall possible, moral implications. Ahsoka's counter-argument is, but that would be wrong. No other argument given. This is Season 7 Ahsoka. Or I guess Season 5. But the point is, we're several years into the Clone Wars. This woman is not this ignorant or naive. How many of you have heard of Small World Syndrome? Now, I push back against Small World Syndrome a little bit. Because Small World Syndrome it's when a work feels too small because it's constantly referencing itself, right? You go to another planet and then there's, Luke. Then you go to another planet and then there's Luke's brother. You go to a third planet, there's Luke again, right? It's always the same characters and it's always the same thing. And yeah, Tatooine is a great example of this, but Star Wars in general has actually always had a bit of Small World Syndrome problem. Not my term. I didn't come up with it. It is a bit of a problem in Star Wars, to varying degrees over the years. For example, KOTOR 1 used Kashyyyk, but it did so pretty smartly, right? It did so in a good way, in a way that I completely believe and that I'm with, so, okay. And yeah, it varies, right? Again, I push back against Small World Syndrome, because too many people tend to think that any kind of references or any kind of self-consistency or repeating characters or repeating locations is bad. And I think that's going too far the other way. I think it's a bit of a pendulum effect the other way, right? But the catch is, that doesn't mean I'm in favor of everything being too tiny. Because, well, that's the other way, right? So anyways, apparently the events of, I think it was the film, or maybe it was Season 1, I don't remember when it was in the Clone Wars, but when they were going after the Hutt, Zero, there's a scene, they even describe the scene in this episode, which led to the death of Rafa and Trace's parents. Okay. Cool. I'm with it. Little too much. Little too much, if I'm being honest. I know that Star Wars is kind of built onto that kind of a concept. I know that Star Wars just lives and breathes too small world syndrome. Really. Like, it's even a problem in the original trilogy, if you sit back and think about it. But the idea that Ahsoka would randomly stumble upon the orphaned children Yes, she does describe it way too much detail. Would stumble upon the orphaned children who happen to be orphaned by the events of the previous incident, like however many years ago at this point in lore. And like 5 years ago, oh God, actually more like 12 years ago, excuse me, in real time. Like, just, that's, huh? A little bit too much. And I know what you're going to say. The Force. And yeah, exactly, Malachor. It's just, So it's a little bit too much, is what I'm trying to say. Then I have to point out that the dialogue is really terrible. Like, I know I've said this before, but this is really, really bad dialogue. This person does not know how to write people talking. The way that Rafa gives this whole speech is supposed to be done... You've seen the scene before, right? Then, when I looked out, I realized there would be no more hot dogs left. All the hot dogs were gone. I didn't even get to see one. I didn't even get to smell one. They were taken. They were taken from me. And I didn't get to eat any hot dogs. And Zell falls over. And but that's the type of scene she's doing. But to be perfectly frank, the dialogue I just said off the top of my head is better written than the way she says it. It's entirely too detailed. She's practically got a script in front of her in lore, reading off, like she's reading. The way she's talking about it is it's like she's reading a news report, right? And all of the emotional beats that are probably supposed to be there aren't. And even during the thing, even during the sequence as she's giving her big emotional speech, she mentions that the Jedi saved tons and tons and tons of innocent lives. Right? And I should mention the direction on the actress is terrible here. Because the direction I just used just now is close to what you should probably feel. There should probably be some lingering resentment. If this is significant and a substantial point in their lives, then that needs to be coming across in her tone. There needs to be something there indicating that in her tempo, in how she talks. Instead, she feels like she's reading a magazine. And it's just like, okay, like, because the way this could have been read and should have been read is, the Jedi were able to adjust the flight of the speeder as it was crashing and saved hundreds of lives that day. Except for 2. The only 2 lives that weren't saved are the ones that mattered most to me. We lived on the other side of that wall. Past tense. Right? But instead, she's just like... just... What? And then she's dragged off to be tortured by gangsters, and she said, if I die, you'll get the family business. Why do they keep trying to make this a comedy? The music is doing that music-y, lighthearted, whimsical thing again, by the way. I've noticed that again. And then there's this weird attempt at this kind of like lighthearted, silly, fun thing, which is then contrasted by honest-to-God torture. Some fictional works can really make serious and silly work alongside each other. It's difficult. It's hard to do. I call it Yakuza effect after the Yakuza series, which does a pretty good job of this by and large. But it's hard. It's very difficult to make those two things gel in a way that's believable and doesn't just feel jarring or awkward or cringe. This is not one of those things. See, yeah, apparently we really needed to get across the fact that this is, in fact, the Clone Wars. You know, given how the Pikes were, I legitimately thought they were just torturing them because they were the Pikes. But no, they actually want to know what the spice is, which... Okay. So why wouldn't she immediately say, oh yeah, we jettisoned it? Or anything else whatsoever? You cannot tell me Rafa has torture tolerance to be able to withstand that. You can't. Then they do the escape sequence, and the escape sequence is done just a couple of minutes after the aforementioned torture, with lighthearted This is after she has to wake up someone who literally fainted from passing out from pain overload. They, of course, immediately run away. Okay, cool. And as they're running to escape, they literally bump into each other. And then they have a silly, whimsical, musical argument over things like, no, we should go this way. No, we should go this way. That would be funny, actually, Uthor. I'm going to give him the episode credit for that. Yeah, they do that. It's just... okay. And then, of course, Wilhelm Pike dies. Salud. I have to admit, one of the only things about the episode that interested me at all is I find the idea of a Jedi who's trying very, very hard not to make it clear that they're a Jedi as an interesting story hook. I mean, Jedi Fallen Order sort of teased with that a little bit, but like as an everyday thing, right? They're just going about their everyday life. They're trying very hard to make it so that nobody knows that they're a Jedi, right? There's some interesting story ideas they could do with that, especially during the times of the Galactic Empire and the Inquisition. I think that's a really good idea for some of that stuff. They don't do that here. I just thought I'd comment on it. It was the only thing that caught my attention about most of the sequence, because then escape sequence. Trace would have died, just straight up died, if Ahsoka hadn't. Yep. Of course, Rafa's about to abandon her. Then there's this interesting bit where one of the Pike guys dies a really horrible death. Death by elevator. They don't really do anything with it. I just thought I'd mention it really quick, because they don't even like do anything with it. It's just, oh my god, and then they run on as if nothing happened. Like, consider that Rafa and Trace have probably never killed before in their lives, or been present or polity to death. That probably should actually have caused some kind of a reaction other than none whatsoever. Yes, baby? I think that's you. It's dinner time. Oh, that's true. Trace has killed many people. She's killed so many people. She's a hardened killer. She's so evil. What? Okay, I'm sorry. One moment, please. What are you doing? So, after this horrific, brutal death, and this awful dialogue, I actually decided to write down some of the dialogue, just to demonstrate how absolutely terrible this crap is. You ready for this? Ahsoka says, "This is what happens when you get into business with criminals." The rejoinder, the counter-argument to that is, when you're trying to make a living, you don't really think of the possible torture or execution part of the deal. What? Now, I could see this dialogue working a little bit better with a slightly different delivery and a little bit of adjusting of the lines. Hear me out for a second. This is what tends to happen when you get into business with these types of people. Notice I don't say criminals, because criminals is just it's too generic of a word. It's too dismissive of a word. The Pikes aren't criminals. They're horrible. The rejoinder is, I guess when you're trying to make a living, you don't think about possible torture or execution part of the deal. In other words, that she's acknowledging the point here, right? That she's actually processing the point. But instead, the way she says it is, that's the overall tone she has, which doesn't work at all. So I don't know if this is a dialogue thing or a voice direction thing, but either way, it doesn't work. So then Bo-Katan shows up. Speaking of small world syndrome. Sure. Then, the Pike villain takes too long to kill anybody, and yes, I know it was part of a trap. I also have to wonder, why does this cargo hauler have guns attached to it? One last thing to talk about this episode. I'm gonna go grab dinner. It does, Cashel. It really does. Let's talk about story structure, something that's been of great interest to me recently. Someone tell me in chat, how does this episode begin? What is the state of affairs at the beginning of the episode? In the cell, captured by the Pikes. The three of them in the cell, captured by the Pikes. Someone tell me, what is the state of the episode at the end? And yes, I do look angry here for a reason. Because this actually pissed me off. As soon as I realized they were going to revert to square one, I got angry. So here's the deal. I've studied television for the better part of 26 years at this point. And I understand that sometimes you need to stretch things out, right? Sometimes you need another episode or another 5 minutes or another whatever. And there's a skill to that. There's a skill to stretching things out to reach the runtime. To doing it well, to doing it good, to doing it interesting. My favorite example of this of all time is in Star Trek The Next Generation. You know how poker is a regular repeating character point for a lot of characters across the whole show? The very, very first time that the regular poker game showed up in TNG was one of those moments. They needed an extra, 5 or 6 minutes. So they came up with the poker game, and they sat there and they played poker. And it became a thing, because it was a way for the characters to interact with each other, for us to learn about them, and how they interact with each other. It was done for something other than just padding, right? Or yeah, the dartboard in DS9 is actually another example of this. But this is probably the worst example of spinning your wheels I've ever seen. I know I'm exaggerating. But I don't feel like I am. They literally start in the cell, get recaptured, and end in the cell. What? It's very, oftentimes thematically or metaphorically, you'll end up back at square one. And that can be done to good effect, actually. It's very rare that you literally end up back at square one by the end of a particular episode or arc or movie or whatever. And yeah, the only thing accomplished in the entire episode is that Bo-Katan saw Ahsoka. That's it. So here's the deal. This is blue, right? And I want to explain that a little bit, because I'm sure some of you are thinking, hang on, Lore, with how angry and how frustrated and how awful this is, surely it's Lamentation, right? For those of you who know me, it takes an extra little bit of oomph to push down to Lamentation or up to Purple. Those two are kind of separate. They're their special own category, separate from the overwhelming majority of fiction. So the overwhelming majority of fiction is blue to red, right? So in other words, this can't be Lamentation, and Lamentations can be a lot worse than this. But this is awful. This is badly written, badly directed. Usually I can at least point to something in these kind of episodes. In the previous 2 episodes, I could point to at least something that's interesting world-building wise, or something that's interesting in terms of presentation, or nice architecture, or interesting lines of dialogue. I have nothing here. It's true, this isn't even the worst Clone Wars episode. There's worse than this. This is just... You know, truthfully, I don't actually remember off the top of my head, Spartan. I haven't watched Move Along Home since the Rumination. Ask me again in a few months when I get to the DS9 part of the lore run. I'll be able to answer you more thoroughly. Yeah, no, this is very Clone Wars. So we're gonna give this a blue. This is just wow. I'm honestly shocked. I really am. You want to hear something sad? We compare it against all of television ever, Bionic Punk. What's really sad is we have covered... So the way that the scoring system works is each better ranking gives more score. Very linear, right? So a purple is 6 and a blue is 1. Arcane, in 3 episodes, managed 16. Clone Wars Season 7, in 7 episodes, has managed 22. So, there's going to be a bit more of a gap than usual. I am committed. Let's go ahead and finish this arc tonight. So I'm going to go grab dinner. I'm going to watch the episode. And then I'm going to come back. Let's see what we got.